The Battle of Jabiim stands as one of the grimmest chapters in the Clone Wars, a conflict marked by devastation, betrayal, and despair. For Anakin Skywalker, a Jedi Knight hailed as the Chosen One, it was a crucible that tested his resolve, his morality, and his connection to the Jedi Order. The rainy, mud-drenched wasteland of Jabiim became a theater of suffering, where the ideals of the Republic clashed with the cold reality of war, and where Anakin's destiny began to darken. Jabiim, a resource-rich Outer Rim world, was of immense strategic value to both the Republic and the Separatists. Its vast mines supplied a wealth of materials critical to the war effort, and its location provided a key foothold in the Outer Rim sieges. Yet the planet's importance was matched only by its volatility. Decades of political turmoil had left Jabiim deeply divided. While some factions sought allegiance with the Republic, others, embittered by long-standing neglect and exploitation, sided with the Separatists. These divisions set the stage for one of the bloodiest battles of the Clone Wars. The Republic's initial deployment to Jabiim was led by Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin's mentor, along with a significant contingent of clone troopers. However, almost immediately, the campaign was plagued by setbacks. The treacherous terrain, endless rain, thick mud, and jagged landscapes rendered advanced Republic equipment nearly useless. Worse, the Separatists, led by the cunning Asajj Ventress and bolstered by local insurgents, launched a series of brutal ambushes that decimated the Republic forces. The Jedi, revered as symbols of hope and strength, were now symbols of vulnerability, their lightsabers and tactics ineffective against the unrelenting chaos. Amidst this bleak backdrop, Anakin found himself thrust into a role far beyond his years. Obi-Wan had been captured in the opening stages of the battle, leaving Anakin to assume command of the Republic forces. At only 19 years old, he was forced to lead soldiers into a conflict spiraling out of control. Though skilled and charismatic, Anakin was not yet the seasoned general the war would later mold him into. He was still learning to balance the weight of leadership with his personal struggles, and on Jabiim, the burden grew unbearable. The Separatists and their Jabiimi allies exploited Anakin's inexperience, employing guerrilla tactics that drained morale and resources. Every day brought news of another ambush, another patrol lost in the mud, another Jedi cut down by unseen enemies. Anakin, deeply attuned to the suffering of those around him, felt the anguish of his troops acutely. His compassion, one of his greatest strengths, became a source of torment as he watched his brothers in arms fall. Despite his efforts to inspire hope, the atmosphere in the Republic camp grew grim. Clones, bred for loyalty and discipline, began to falter under the relentless pressure. Anakin's speeches, full of conviction and determination, started to ring hollow in the ears of those who could no longer see a path to victory. The loss of the Jedi Masters compounded the despair. Jabiim was a graveyard for the Jedi Order, with many of its brightest lights extinguished in futile engagements. For Anakin, each death was a personal wound, a reminder of his inability to protect those who looked to him for guidance. He carried the weight of these failures alongside his growing disillusionment with the Republic's strategy. The High Council on Coruscant, far removed from the mud and blood of Jabiim, issued orders that seemed increasingly detached from the reality on the ground. Their insistence on holding the planet at all costs came across as cold and calculating, a sharp contrast to the ideals of justice and compassion the Jedi were meant to embody. As the battle dragged on, the lines between friend and foe blurred. The Republic's local allies, initially seen as partners in the fight against tyranny, grew resentful of the Jedi's inability to deliver swift victory. Their trust in the Republic eroded, and some factions defected to the Separatists, citing betrayal and abandonment. Anakin, already struggling to maintain cohesion among his forces, was now faced with a crumbling alliance. The duplicity of the Jabiimi leaders ignited a deep anger within him, a fury born of betrayal and frustration. His faith in diplomacy, always tenuous, began to waver. In its place grew a reliance on force, a belief that strength and decisive action were the only means of achieving peace. Anakin's descent into darkness was not a dramatic fall but a gradual erosion of his ideals. On Jabiim, this erosion accelerated. The mud-caked trenches and blood-soaked battlefields became mirrors of his inner turmoil, reflecting the conflict between his duty as a Jedi and his innate desire for control. he began to take greater risks, leading frontal assaults that bordered on reckless. These actions, while occasionally yielding tactical successes, came at a tremendous cost in lives. Clone troopers, loyal to a fault, followed him without question, but the casualties mounted. Each loss hardened Anakin further, numbing him to the humanity of those around him. The boy who once dreamed of freeing slaves and bringing light to the galaxy was slowly being buried under the weight of war. Yet, even in the darkest moments, there were glimmers of Anakin's inherent goodness. He formed bonds with the soldiers under his command, treating them as individuals rather than expendable assets. He mourned their deaths and honored their sacrifices, often risking his own life to save theirs. These acts of compassion endeared him to the troops, who saw in Anakin a leader willing to share their burdens. But this connection, as noble as it seemed, also deepened his suffering. Every fallen soldier was another failure, another reason to question his ability to lead. The cycle of grief and determination, hope and despair, pushed Anakin closer to the edge. The final days of the battle were a nightmare. The Republic forces, battered and outnumbered, found themselves encircled by the enemy. Supplies ran low, morale was shattered, and the prospect of reinforcements from Coruscant grew increasingly dim. Anakin, though exhausted and haunted by visions of defeat, refused to surrender. He rallied his troops for one last stand, a desperate attempt to break through the separatist lines and escape the quagmire of Jabiim. This battle, later known as the Mudslide Massacre, was a brutal testament to the horrors of war. Republic forces charged through the muck and rain, their blasters blazing, only to be cut down by waves of droid fire and insurgent traps. Anakin fought like a man possessed, his lightsaber a beacon of defiance in the chaos. He cut through enemy lines with a ferocity that shocked even his own men, his raw power on full display. But his efforts were in vain. The Republic forces were overwhelmed, their offensive shattered by the unyielding resistance. The survivors, including Anakin, were forced into a hasty retreat, leaving behind thousands of dead. The mud of Jabiim swallowed the dreams of the Republic, and for Anakin, it was a haunting reminder of his limitations. When the rescue fleet finally arrived to extract the remnants of the Republic forces, the planet was left to the Separatists, its people abandoned to their fate. Jabiim was a loss on every level: strategic, moral, and personal. For Anakin, it marked the beginning of a profound transformation. The battle stripped away much of his idealism, replacing it with cynicism and a growing reliance on his own instincts over the guidance of the Jedi Council. It was here, amidst the mud and rain, that the seeds of doubt were sown. The Jedi Code, which preached detachment and calm, seemed ill-suited to the brutal realities of war. Anakin began to question whether the Jedi Order truly understood the galaxy's suffering, whether their methods were capable of achieving the peace they so desperately sought. Jabiim became a ghost that followed Anakin long after he left its surface. The memories of the fallen, the cries of the dying, and the weight of his own failures haunted him. It was not just a battle, it was a crucible that reshaped him, drawing him closer to the path that would one day lead to the dark side. As the rain continued to fall on Jabiim, washing away the blood and the tears, Anakin Skywalker carried the storm within him, a storm that would soon engulf the entire galaxy. The aftermath of the Battle of Jabiim left a profound and indelible mark on Anakin Skywalker. Though the Republic forces managed to escape with their lives, their retreat was a hollow victory, overshadowed by the crushing weight of their defeat. Jabiim, once a symbol of the Republic's reach and ideals, was now a painful reminder of its failures. For Anakin, the planet was more than a battlefield, it was a crucible that began to forge the darker aspects of his character. As he departed the rain-soaked wasteland, the scars left by Jabiim would only deepen in the years to come. Back on Coruscant, the political and military leadership of the Republic spun the loss of Jabiim as a necessary, if regrettable, strategic withdrawal. Senators debated logistics and resources, while the Jedi Council reflected on the tactical mistakes and the lessons to be learned. But for Anakin, the wounds of the battle were personal, not abstract. He found himself at odds with the detachment the Jedi Council urged him to maintain. How could they sit in their pristine chambers and analyze the war from a distance, far removed from the blood and suffering of the front lines? Their aloofness infuriated him, fueling his growing doubts about their capacity to lead a galaxy at war. His disillusionment was exacerbated by his own sense of guilt. On Jabiim, he had taken risks, pushed his soldiers to their limits, and watched them die for objectives that ultimately proved futile. Every life lost weighed heavily on his conscience, yet he could not shake the belief that his way had been the only way. The Jedi teachings of patience and peace seemed hollow when confronted with the cold reality of war. More and more, he found solace not in the Jedi Code, but in his belief in his own power and judgment. This burgeoning reliance on himself, rather than the guidance of his mentors, marked a critical shift in Anakin's psyche. The separation from Obi-Wan Kenobi during the battle only deepened the divide. Anakin had always looked to his master as a source of stability, a moral compass in times of uncertainty. But Jabiim had forced him to step into a leadership role prematurely, with no one to guide him. When Obi-Wan was eventually rescued and reunited with him, their relationship was not the same. Though they fought side by side in subsequent battles, a subtle tension lingered. Anakin had tasted the burden of command and the isolation that came with it, and he began to resent Obi-Wan's role as both mentor and overseer. The cracks in their bond widened, paving the way for the rift that would later consume them both. The clones, too, were deeply affected by Jabiim. Though bred for loyalty and resilience, they were not immune to the psychological toll of the battle. The mud, the rain, the constant ambushes all had taken their toll on their spirits. Yet many of them held Anakin in high regard, seeing in him a leader who truly cared for their well-being. His willingness to fight alongside them, to risk his life for their survival, earned him their respect and devotion. But this bond was a double-edged sword. The more the clones admired him, the more responsibility Anakin felt for their fates. It created an emotional burden that only added to the strain he carried. Anakin's return to Coruscant offered no reprieve. The vibrant, towering metropolis felt like a world away from the mud and despair of Jabiim, yet its halls of power held their own kind of darkness. The Republic's Senate, mired in bureaucracy and infighting, seemed incapable of comprehending the true cost of the war. Politicians like Chancellor Palpatine spoke of strategy and sacrifice, but their words rang hollow to Anakin, who had seen firsthand what those sacrifices entailed. Palpatine, however, stood out in one critical way: he listened. Unlike the Jedi Council, which demanded adherence to the code and offered little empathy, Palpatine expressed understanding. He praised Anakin's courage and leadership, feeding his ego while subtly stoking his frustrations with the Jedi. The Chancellor's influence grew steadily stronger in the wake of Jabiim. He offered Anakin a vision of strength, control, and decisive action qualities that the young Jedi craved after the chaos of the battlefield. Palpatine framed the Jedi as outdated and constrained by their dogma, a sentiment that resonated deeply with Anakin. Though he did not yet realize it, Jabiim had planted the seeds of distrust that Palpatine would later exploit to devastating effect. Amidst this growing turmoil, Anakin struggled to reconcile his personal losses. He carried the memories of the fallen Jedi, clones and civilians alike, like a weight around his neck. The image of a young Padawan, cut down in the mud, haunted his dreams. He replayed the battle in his mind, imagining different outcomes, different choices. His failure to save them all gnawed at him, feeding the belief that he needed more power to prevent such tragedies in the future. This desire for power, born from a place of compassion and protection, was the first step on a path that would lead to ruin. The shadow of Jabiim extended beyond Anakin's personal struggles. The loss of the planet had significant ramifications for the Republic's war effort. Without Jabiim's resources, the Republic faced logistical challenges that strained its already overextended forces. The Separatists, emboldened by their victory, launched a series of offensives in the Outer Rim, pushing the Republic to its limits. Each battle reminded Anakin of Jabiim, a reminder of the war's unrelenting cost and his growing inability to make sense of it all. Amid the chaos, Anakin found solace in Padme Amidala, the woman he loved in secret. Her presence was a rare source of light in the darkness consuming him. Yet even their relationship was tainted by the war. Anakin's nightmares, fueled by his fears of losing her, grew more intense. The trauma of Jabiim amplified his protective instincts, making him cling to Padme with increasing desperation. He saw her as a beacon of hope, the one person who could save him from the storm within. But this dependence, coupled with his inability to confide in her fully, created a tension that would only deepen as the war continued. The lessons of Jabiim, harsh as they were, shaped Anakin into a more formidable warrior. He learned to adapt to the unpredictability of battle, to anticipate the tactics of guerrilla fighters, and to lead with unrelenting determination. Yet these lessons came at a cost. The idealistic young Jedi, who had once dreamed of peace and justice, was replaced by a hardened soldier, willing to do whatever it took to achieve victory. The line between Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader grew thinner with each passing day. Jabiim was more than just a battle, it was a turning point. The mud, the rain, the death, it all became etched into Anakin's soul, a constant reminder of his failures and his potential. The scars it left were invisible but deep, shaping his decisions and pushing him closer to the edge. The galaxy would come to know Anakin Skywalker as a hero of the Republic, a symbol of hope in a time of despair. But on Jabiim, the hero began to fall, consumed by the darkness that would one day engulf him and the galaxy itself.